Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Profit Minds podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch, creator of the Profit Minds Growth System, a unique blend of profit growth, productivity acceleration, and building robust business process for scale. In every episode, I interview entrepreneurs and small business owners from around the world with a unique story to tell. You can find the show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Well, hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Jeff Lenning of Excel University. And today we're going to talk about how to use Excel to make your business better. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Appreciate you having me on your show.
So, as you know, the first question I ask everybody, how did you get to be the provost? I didn't say it. How did you come to found Excel University?
Yeah. So basically for me, it's all about efficiency. And as I think back for the last 20 years or more, it's how can I get this task done faster? How can I get it done faster than last month or faster than my peers or, this type of approach. And so when I was the accounting manager for a public company, I'm a CPA, so I grew up in traditional accounting and finance types of roles. But when I was the accounting manager for a public company, we had this little monthly project called the monthly financial close. And so I had to create a bunch of entries and calculations and reports. And that process was typically around 2 weeks out of every month. And during those 2 weeks, I was overwhelmed with work. I was stressed out. I was cranky, grouchy. I would come home grumpy, just that whole scene, right?
2 weeks out of every month. So about half of your life.
Yes, exactly. And so I'm like, wow, something really needs to change. And so I really started focusing on getting Excel to do my work. How do I delegate my task to Excel, not to another employee, but to Excel? And so this mindset really helped me delegate all of these manual steps to Excel. And over the course of, focused continuous improvement and enhancing my own Excel skills, I was able to get the monthly close from 2 weeks down to 2 days. And I was like, wow, Excel is insane. It's bigger than people give it credit for. It can do a lot. And I need to help other people do what I've been able to do. And so basically I wrote an article and I emailed it to the editor of the Journal of Accountancy and he liked it. And to my surprise, he published it. And I'm like, all right, I'm onto something. So it just has grown from there, from books and hundreds of in-person seminars to ultimately now this online training platform, which is a very effective way to reach scale and help many people learn how to do what I did through using Excel.
So are you mainly aimed at CPAs then, or can regular solopreneurs or small business owners utilize Excel in the same way you're doing it?
Yeah, it's for anyone who would say that they use Excel on a regular basis to do the same types of reports or projects every day, week, month, quarter, year, what I'll call recurring use workbooks. That's the sweet spot. And so it's not just for CPAs, although my courses do qualify for CPE credit in case you're a CPA. We're not exclusive for CPAs. It's really any user that says, I use Excel, daily or weekly, and I kind of update the same types of reports, day, week, month, quarter, year.
Okay. And is it around numbers? Because I use Excel instead of a word table, right? With paragraphs and stuff like that in there. Do you have automations that help with those kinds of manipulations as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because Excel is a big place. And so it is very capable of doing calculations, not just with numbers, but on text values, like dates, like times. And so I do have some lessons that talk about the text functions within Excel and how to automate those types of things as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the big benefit then of doing this in Excel and making sure that you have the same kind of recurring things. And so talk to me a little bit about, how would somebody say, well, gee, I do sort of the same thing, but how could they make it so that it really could be repetitive and they could really see that kind of, I'll say, 90% time reduction that you saw?
Yeah, and you're right on it. It's like 90% of the tasks that we tend to do can be handled by Excel. But basically, let's say we download some. Let's just put an example. I need to download the set of numbers from an ERP system, a marketing system, an e-commerce system, whatever you're working with, right? And then I need to create some type of analysis or report. And it's like, well, Jeff, can't we just click a button inside that e-commerce or ERP system to create the report? And like when we can, yes, for sure, that's going to be the fastest. But oftentimes it ends up in Excel because we have to supplement those numbers with data that comes from another system. Like a classic example is, how do we do actual versus budget? Well, the actual is in my accounting system, let's just say it's QuickBooks, and my budget's over in some other system. And so I need to do one report that uses values from two different systems. And so instead of downloading those two and then importing them into Excel and then manually cleaning up the columns and removing the extra rows and then doing a sort and then taking the other values and doing lookups and then doing the difference, like instead of doing those tasks every month, we can set up Excel using a couple of key tools like Power Query and others, where we just do the download and then inside of Excel, we click refresh. And Power Query can go to those downloaded files, clean up all the data all the way in so it's landing in Excel in a clean format, and then we click refresh to update the pivot table and it's done. So that's an example of how that might work.
Wow. That sounds like it would go really, really fast by comparison to what you would have to do if you're doing this manually right?
Exactly. It becomes a list of steps. Oftentimes, if we're building a workbook, we might have some notes about how do we update this every quarter. And so all of those notes of things we would do manually is replaced with this refresh. And, once you kind of figure out which tools like Power Query and sum ifs and pivot tables you can deploy to automate those manual steps.
So how is this different? Because the world is all abuzz with AI. So how is what you do different from what I can do in ChatGPT or some other generative AI tool? How is that different?
Yeah, so I use ChatGPT, I use Copilot like practically on a daily basis, and I found those tools are really good at certain things. And when it comes to Excel, it's really good at explaining things you encounter and helping you write a specific formula for a specific task. And that's different than what I teach, which is this overall principle and philosophy of how do we create our workbooks from the ground up to be reliable, efficient, and accurate. And so I teach more of a body of knowledge than a specific, I need help on this one specific area. So I've used ChatGPT and Copilot to help explain a formula that I encounter. Maybe you're familiar with this. You open up a workbook that someone else has created, or maybe you created it like a year ago and you're like, I must have been in a zone because I don't even remember how I wrote this formula. And so you can get these AI tools to just explain it, and it explains all the function arguments, all the functions, and that. So for learning specific tasks, AI is awesome.
Yeah. But not, you're saying that's a completely different function from what you do in your courses.
Correct, because I really show how to take a whole process flow and automate it. So how do I take this budget versus actual report and completely automate it? Well, there you're going to need to know Power Query, you're going to need to know sum ifs, you're going to need to know pivot tables, you're going to need to know pivot charts. So it's teaching the whole process for how do we fully automate those types of projects.
Okay. And what's the most popular course that you have? What's the course that people tell you they find the most valuable of the things that you offer? And what does it teach them?
Yeah, there's a few different training passes. The most popular is a campus pass or a CPE pass, But if it's okay, I would just like to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So basically, I've written 6 standalone courses, and they're best thought of as actually one course, but it takes me like a year to create a course. So rather than wait till all 6 were done, I just release them as standalone courses once a year, and then people can register for those standalone courses. But once I finished all 6, I bundled them into this insanely discounted like package that not only includes the on-demand lessons, but also includes access to me through live office hours and access to our TAs through live study halls, like through Zoom. Because this all came from me doing hundreds of in-person sessions all over the country, live 8-hour sessions. And so I figured out that I had 2 main problems or feedback items, which is, hey, Jeff, you're going too fast. And hey, Jeff, you're going too slow. And it's because when it comes to Excel, people show up with different, experience levels. And I already know VLOOKUP, so move it along. Jeff, I've never seen VLOOKUP. Can you slow it down? So I pre-recorded all of the lessons and set them to on-demand, like self-study videos, pre-recorded videos. And that way users can work at their own pace, rewind, pause, slow down, speed back. But then when we leave the classroom, they lose access to the instructor. And so the way that I approach that is through these live scheduled office hours, which are awesome. And they can ask me help on a specific Excel thing or on their own workbook, share their screen and get assistance that way. So that's how I kind of structure them.
Okay. And what is, so I've heard of a pivot table, but why don't you describe, because you've used that word a couple of times, why don't you describe for our listeners, what is a pivot table and how would you use it?
Yeah. So a pivot table is a report. That's the cleanest way to think about it. So when we think about a report, we think of having some underlying detail or underlying transactions, and we want a summary report. So we would create a pivot table to summarize all of the thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of rows of exported data. And so the pivot table becomes a dynamic, refreshable, summary level report.
Okay. Is that typically what you're teaching people how to do, is to create those kinds of reports from tables of numbers, basically? Yeah,
that's one of the big areas of taking, data transactions and then creating summary reports. And sometimes a pivot table is a great option, but oftentimes the reports that, accounting and finance builds they don't lend themselves to pivot tables. So I teach about multiple ways to do, these types of reports. And that's just the funny thing about Excel, which is that there's usually multiple ways to accomplish any given task. And so I usually walk through the different options so that when you're in your daily routine and you come up with a scenario, you're like, hey, I know for this specific situation, a pivot table would be a great fit, or not. Maybe we were going to build a formula-based report with some ifs. And so, so I kind of teach those key topics that are going to provide the most efficiency over time.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so is there anything that you do specifically for CPAs that's different from what you do for, I'll say run of the mill, but for entrepreneurs in general? Is there something specifically for CPAs?
Yeah, definitely. So as a CPA, I am aware of the types of features and functions that are going to be really relevant to CPAs. And so the CPE Pass, which is the training program specifically designed for CPAs, is designed to kind of walk through those common tasks using examples that they'll be familiar with. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is that NASBA is an association here in the U.S. and so we are a NASBA CPE sponsor. And so with that, we're able to offer continuing professional education or CPE credits for CPAs. And that becomes really important for those students, because they are required to get 40 hours of CPE credit every year to maintain their CPA certificate and their CPA license. And so if they're going to be dedicating 40 hours of their year to learn something, it's like, why not learn something that's very practical, that's going to cause you to be much more efficient in your day-to-day activities. And so back when I was a CPA, younger CPA growing up, CPE was earned in these live 8-hour sessions, right?
Yeah. From some older CPA who is probably not the most entertaining person in the world.
I mean, yeah, the instructors varied, but yeah, they could be, and so over time, it's kind of evolved to where CPE is now just delivered for like compliance purposes. And so you'd log into a 1-hour, webinar, just clicking these attendance checks. And so it's lost that true core thing, which is you need to be learning the skills that are going to increase your core competency and enable you to be relevant, at your job. And so I'm happy that my courses really go back to the roots of CPE, which is I'm going to teach you something that is going to be very practical and really help you in your career. So yeah, that's kind of how the evolution of that was.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So do you offer anything that the listeners might find valuable, a free download or something like that?
Absolutely. So I offer a free class. I offer a free weekly Excel tips newsletter. And so if your listeners would like to get more information on that, they can head to excel-university.com/tips. And they can sign in for the Excel Tips newsletter. So it's EXCEL, like Microsoft Excel, -university.com/tips. And yeah, right there they can sign up for the free newsletter. And that newsletter is not sales oriented, it is Excel Tips oriented. So there'll be a weekly Excel newsletter that comes out on email. It has a tip, a blog post, a link to my latest YouTube video, and those types of things. Plus then the free class, which qualifies for 2 CPE credits if they're CPAs and would like education credits for it.
Great. And what's the best way for people to reach out?
Yeah, the best way is probably at excel-university.com/tips. And so there's a contact information there. So that's kind of the best centralized location for people to get a hold of me or to learn more.
All right, great. Thanks. And that concludes our show. Thanks to my guest, Jeff Lenning of Excel University. I hope you learned something about how to use Excel to make your business better. I know I did. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Profit Minds podcast. This is your host, Dr. Stephen Kirch. Please visit www.profitminds.net for other episodes or to contact me. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others. Thanks for listening. Have a grateful day.